I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom From Religion Foundation, and this is Free Thought Matters.
And I'm Dan Barker. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom From Religion Foundation, which serves as the nation's largest association of freethinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, working to protect the constitutional principle of the separation between state and church.
Become a part of FFRF. Sign up at our website for a free trial membership or join at ffrf.org. We'd love your support so that reason and our secular constitution can prevail.
Today, we're so pleased to have in studio with us Nancy Northup. Nancy is named FFRF's 2019 Forward Award honoree, who has been leading the Center for Reproductive Rights since 2003. Nancy Northup has taught human rights and constitutional law at Columbia Law School, among many other legal positions, and she truly helps to move society forward.
So, Nancy, welcome to Free Thought Matters.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we so admire the work of the Center for Reproductive Rights. And the Center is involved in so many of the current legal battles over abortion rights and contraception in the United States today. But there's a Supreme Court case coming up that the Center is involved in, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So we have been involved in every major Supreme Court case since our founding in 1992, and we have a whole host of state and federal lawsuits going on right now around the country because there's so much pressure on access to abortion in the United States right now. But the case in the Supreme Court is about the exact same issue as a case we won 3 years ago, and that's what's tough about it. So 3 years ago, in a case called Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, we won a case because Texas had passed a bunch of pretextual, supposedly health regulations imposed on clinics only in Texas that the Supreme Court found were not medically sound, that abortion is a very safe procedure, and that, in fact, they had the impact of closing clinics across the state of Texas.
So these were saying, for example, that doctors had to have hospital admitting privileges?
Correct. In Texas, part of it was about hospital admitting privileges. The other part in the Texas case was that they had to be ambulatory surgical centers, even for first trimester abortions. Absolutely not necessary. Abortion is a very safe procedure. So the Supreme Court ruled that that was unconstitutional. And other states across the country stopped defending such laws, or their courts went ahead and implemented and said their state laws were unconstitutional. Louisiana has been in open defiance of the Supreme Court's ruling. And so Louisiana has the identical law that was found unconstitutional in Texas by the Supreme Court 3 years ago in that case. And the Supreme Court just took it for a hearing again. And so we're in the court right now battling about whether the same identical law that was unconstitutional in Texas is also unconstitutional in Louisiana. And the answer is it absolutely is.
So the court didn't have to take this case, but they did. Do you think that's a good thing that they took it or a bad thing that they took it?
Can you tell us where it is at the appeals court level?
Yes, so we won at the trial court. The trial court followed the Constitution, followed the Supreme Court's ruling, and looked at the facts in Louisiana and said, just like in Texas, this admitting privileges requirement was going to close clinics in the state. Louisiana only has 3 clinics, and it would only leave 1 doctor in the state if it were to go into effect. So we won at the trial court, which is where facts are found. It then went up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and a decision that also failed to follow the Supreme Court's precedent in Whole Women's Health. The Fifth Circuit rendered an opinion saying, no, the law can go into effect. We rushed to the Supreme Court. We actually got the law blocked in February of 2019, temporarily, so that we could bring the case to the whole Supreme Court. So we did need them to take the case, but we now need them to quickly see it's a straightforward case. It's the same issue. Women will be hurt in Louisiana if this law goes into effect. But argument will be coming ahead in 2020.
So by taking the case, it's still live, because they could have denied it, and Louisiana would have been.
But then that would have been bad.
Yeah.
That would have been, exactly. If they had not taken it at all, the law would have gone into effect, and we would have seen the state be down to 1 clinic.
Yeah. Wow.
So they did need to take the case, but again, it shouldn't be a complicated case for them. Nothing's changed. The identical language, the identical law, the identical impact. Still no reason to have such a law, which is what the district court found.
But what has changed is the makeup of the court.
Yes. So in 2016, when we won the whole women's health case, Justice Kennedy was on the court, and Justice Kennedy ruled with the majority that it was unconstitutional. Justice Kennedy has since retired. He's been replaced by Justice Kavanaugh. So we do have a different composition of the court, and that, however, should not change the outcome. I mean, we cannot have our courts and our highest court be politicized in the way that we see every other branch of government is these days. It's going to be very important. The integrity of the court, I would say, is on the line because a change in justices should not change a decision from 3 years ago.
Absolutely. Now, I hate to talk about depressing things, but some legal scholars are projecting that by the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, they expect major changes against it by the Supreme Court. Do you share that pessimistic view, or do you think that the court could still hang on to the precedent of Roe v. Wade?
Well, we will be arguing quite vigorously to the entire court that they need to follow their precedent. And we have been fighting these battles since 1973. And the fact that often it comes to this, we come to, the brink in these cases is real. So I want to both say that the concern, and we should be concerned, President Trump ran on a platform that said he's going to put justices on the Supreme Court committed to overturning Roe versus Wade. So the concern is real. However, we have also seen over all these decades since 1973 that the court again and again has reaffirmed that the decision about the termination of pregnancy in the early months is one for a woman to make in consultation with her doctor. We were at the brink in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Justice Kennedy, Justice O'Connor did reaffirm, because when you look at the issue, it is really sound in our personal liberties guaranteed by the Constitution that decisions about family and bodily integrity, whether or not to have children, are one that are for the person to make,
And
not for the government.
Kavanaugh at least gave a nod to precedent during the hearings. Of course, they all say that, don't they?
They all say that, don't they? Yes. We have to count on them actually then voting that way. And we will, again, we will be in oral argument making the case that there is just no daylight between the Texas case and now Louisiana. And it's important for the public to be really aware of that and to make sure the public, right, is activated to know that its eyes are on the court, that it cares about having a court that is going to follow precedent when it comes to protecting people's individual rights.
Now, the Center for Reproductive Rights is sort of the leading legal advocate for reproductive rights in the United States, but you also do education, correct?
Well, absolutely. It's important to not only be fighting in courts, but also making sure that the public understands how important our rights are.
The court of public opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think about our Constitution. It doesn't belong to lawyers, for sure. It belongs to all of us. And there's always a dialogue going on between the public and the court and our elected representatives about what the Constitution means. On the issue of abortion, 7 in 10 Americans believe that abortion should be safe and legal. I think the reason why it continues to be so contested is that it is hard for people to speak up and out on this issue because there's been so much bullying, violence, harassment. And so what's really important is when people share that vision, and we know that 7 in 10 do, they need to be talking now to their family, to their friends, to their communities about why they support access to safe and legal abortion, why it's important to them.
Well, it has never been more imperiled. And you've got this case before the Supreme Court, but I know that you're also involved in some of the other assaults at the state level, challenging some of the assaults at the state level, including the Georgia case. Could you talk a little bit about the Georgia laws and some of those other state laws that are threatening reproductive rights?
Yes, what is often flying under the radar screen is that there are hundreds of restrictions on access to abortion, unnecessary restrictions that have been passed in the last several years. And in 2019, we saw an increase in both the number but also the severity, the real extremism. So we had Alabama passed a flat-out ban on abortion altogether,
Yes.
with penalties up to 99 years on doctors. Now, it's been enjoined by the courts, and it's always important to say that because I don't want people in Alabama to think they cannot go to the clinics in the state. Georgia passed a ban at 6 weeks, and that's before a woman may even know that she's pregnant. Those kind of laws passed in other states. Again, it's been enjoined in Georgia because these are flatly unconstitutional laws. But because, again, we had a president who ran saying, I'm going to put justices on the court who are going to overturn Roe versus Wade, you have states emboldened to try to run over women's rights with what they think is an opportunity to have that important precedent overturned.
So before we take the break, could we talk a little bit more about the right to privacy in the Constitution and what's at stake with Roe versus Wade? I mean, this is not a tiny right that is imperiled. Why do we have a right to privacy?
Well, it is one of the most important fundamental rights, which is the right to personal liberty, found in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And people act as if Roe versus Wade stands all by itself in 1973, when in fact, there's 50 years of jurisprudence in the Supreme Court that predates it about the right to personal liberty, and there's 50 years almost past Roe versus Wade. And the kind of cases that were decided way before Roe versus Wade were cases about how you educate your children. There were these cases from the 1920s, one of them out of Nebraska, which said you can't teach a foreign language to a child under the age of 14. That was one of these xenophobic, it was after the First World War, and somebody was actually charged with having taught a child German, and goes up to the Supreme Court, and the court says, while we can understand wanting everybody to think like an American because they're only taught in English, we also understand that this is part of being a free people, this is part of personal liberty. Another case that, the state of Oregon banned people from going to parochial schools, wanted everybody to go to a public school. Supreme Court again said, well, we get why we want to educate everyone to be Americans, but this is for parents to decide. You have those cases, you have marriage cases, you have the Loving case, all of these where the court is saying, and eventually says it so well in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, there is a realm of personal liberty which the government may not enter.
So we have to take a break. We'll be back after the break. We're talking with leading reproductive rights legal advocate Nancy Northup. She's president of the Center for Reproductive Rights, about the center's work to ensure that women in the United States and the world have reproductive freedom.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Charlotte, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. I've always been intrigued by religion, and when I was younger, I desperately wanted to be religious, to be more accepted by my family, who was in majority Catholic. My parents didn't raise me religious. I was never baptized. I never took communion. Well, once I took communion. It was a pretty bad idea. I don't think it was worth a church full of angry elderly who glared at me as I waved the communion wafer back and forth asking my grandma what should be done with it. Also, the wine was pretty gross. From this experience and countless others, I came to 3 conclusions that sort of dictate how I live my secular life. One is that I find people of faith to be more exclusionary and less accepting. 2 is that I would rather work to please the people around me who I care about than someone who, to my knowledge, doesn't exist. And 3, that I would rather help people than pray for them.
Thank you for watching Free Thought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
We're talking with Nancy Northup, who is president of the Center for Reproductive Rights, and she recently received FFRF's Forward Award for her lifetime work to defend reproductive rights. We have a clip from that acceptance speech.
Thank you so much for the 2019 Forward Award. It's interesting, at the Center for Reproductive Rights, we always say fight forward. So we're going to be very, very proud to have this. I was delighted and also a little amused when I was contacted about receiving the Forward Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Delighted because I am a fierce advocate for the separation of state and church. And I was amused because, well, truth be told, I'm a church lady. I have attended church all my life. It is where you'll usually find me on a Sunday morning. I was born and raised a Unitarian Universalist. It was my mother who brought our family to the Unitarian Universalist faith, and nowhere, perhaps, is it more evidence that the government is wielding a particular religious view than in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So it's not happenstance that I come to do this both as a church lady, but as someone passionate about the separation of church and state, and passionate about the ability of women to lead lives in equality and dignity. Because wherever you look, whether it's in the US or around the world, you can see this imposition of specific religious beliefs on public policy and law when it comes to sexuality, reproduction, gender, and the role of women.
So, Nancy, you work in the United States, but you also do global outreach on women's rights.
Yes, the Center for Reproductive Rights works not only in the US, but also in Latin America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and at the UN to make sure that we advance reproductive rights as fundamental human rights that all governments must respect, protect, and fulfill. And so we work with local advocates around the world, and we also bring cases before regional and international human rights bodies on a whole range of issues: access to contraception, access to essential obstetrics care, access to safe and legal abortion, and then addressing violations like child marriage and forced sterilization.
So you have your work cut out for you.
We do, but you know what's heartening about the work on the global sphere is that both nations in their own court decisions, but also the decisions of the UN human rights bodies, are advancing women's ability to make these decisions about their health and lives. Because whenever you look around the world, the issues are the same. If women don't have access to contraception, they cannot control how many children they have. If they don't have access to good obstetrics care, they can die unnecessarily in pregnancy. And if they don't have access to safe and legal abortion, they also have huge health and risks to life. And so there's an understanding that women's right to health, their right to life, their right to dignity, their right to equality are all centered on our ability to control our reproductive.
So the issues are the same, but the laws are different in these different countries. You must have different legal staff on the ground dealing with totally different kinds of laws.
We do. There are, as many countries there are in the world, there are that many different types of laws and policies on women's ability to control their reproductive health care, right? You had everything from, China used to have the one-child policy to you have countries in which they have pronatalist policies trying to encourage women to have multiple pregnancies. And so, yes, we have experts from around the world, but we also partner with national organizations. There's always someone working with us, a human rights group, a women's rights group on the ground that we can partner together to help move forward the understanding of reproductive rights as human rights.
What do you think are some of the worst situations, abuses around the world?
Well, places where women really don't have access to contraception. There also around the world are still places where abortion is illegal in every circumstance, including to save a woman's life. So right now, for example, we work in El Salvador where women are serving prison sentences up to 30 years. And often because they've had a miscarriage and they have been falsely accused of trying to have a self-abortion. And so we have been working and we have gotten some of those women out of prison. But that's the reality that people need to face. If abortion is a crime, every miscarriage is a potential crime scene, and women will get prosecuted.
And those cases are just heartrending in Latin America. And these are Roman Catholic laws that are enshrined in the civil laws. These are, it's the Catholic doctrine that if, save the baby over the mother, the woman can die. So a lot of this would be solved if secular government were honored, but many of these countries don't have a separation between religion and government.
Or sometimes they do, but they have a de facto concordat with the Vatican or something that overrides their secular constitutions.
But it wouldn't just be, so it's also other religions are, Islamist nations are not going to have legal abortion, for example.
Well, what's really interesting is if you take a Catholic country like Ireland and you put the vote to the people, as you know, in 2018, an overwhelming victory. 2/3 of the Irish people said we would like to remove the prohibition on abortion from our Constitution. So I think that's what's really important to remember, that, we need to put in the hands of the populace themselves. And the Irish consider themselves still a Catholic country, but they don't agree with the hierarchy on the issue of abortion. It's also true in the United States.
With the Vatican. Yeah.
That's right.
And ditto, marriage equality there in Ireland was the first country in the world to have a referendum where the people voted for marriage equality.
That's right.
And do you get involved in any LGBTQ issues at Reproductive Center?
Well, we're working on issues of reproductive rights for all people.
Right.
So those reproductive rights will include those of whether they're male or female or trans or non-binary. All of the laws should protect everybody, and that's important. And we have some litigation going on with Lambda Legal, which is an organization for LGBTQ individuals, and as well as we do litigation with Americans United for Separation of Church and State.
So if we have a viewer watching right now who's terrified about what's going on in our country, what would you suggest people do?
I think one of the most important things that every single person can do, and it's one of the simplest things, is to start to talk to people about their support for abortion rights. If you're a woman who is one of the 1 in 4 who's had an abortion in her lifetime, actually making it personal if you're comfortable with that. Because nothing changes people's minds more than when they're talking to someone not about what they see as a politics issue, but a personal decision that they've made. And we've seen again and again when women have been able to talk about that it is really significant. Or even talk about why you support the issue, but from a personal perspective. Why do I support women having access to safe and legal abortion? And that can be transformative. And of course, do all the other things, join organizations and, write to your members of Congress and make it clear in your community. But really beginning by just one-on-one talking to people in your life and saying, I'm concerned about this, because there's so much stigma around it that people think they can't talk about it.
And of course, voting and registering to vote in the upcoming year on this issue. What were you going to say?
So the primary opposition to abortion rights is organized religion. And yet we know that evangelicals and Catholic women are having abortions if they would speak out as well, because they're voting for these religious policies, and yet in their personal lives, they know the importance of having freedom.
Oh, I think that's right. And we see that actually the religion an individual holds doesn't map onto whether or not they access and seek abortion. Women from all different faith traditions do. And I would say that also, I think a lot of the political, opposition to abortion rights is frankly just opportunistic. Right? We've seen time and time again people who might be taking one position in elected office. It doesn't line up with what they actually do in their own lives or what their beliefs are. I mean, the President of the United States clearly is somebody who in the past was a supporter of abortion rights. He changed his mind when he ran for office. There's a lot of cynicism there.
Yes.
And again, it's why it should be protected as a fundamental human right and a constitutional right, because it cannot be left to, unfortunately, the partisanship of politics.
Now, something that's close to my heart is the cutoff of assistance for women on Medicare for abortion coverage. I'm co-administrator of one of many abortion rights funds in the nation. It helps to pay for abortions for women who are indigent, poor, who can't get abortion coverage in 35 or more states because medical assistance has been cut off at the state level, and of course the Hyde Amendment. Any words on that? I mean, it's not something that we can really sue over. It's really legislative, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, a lawsuit was brought back in 1980, and the Supreme Court at that time said that the fact that this affects poor women is not a reason why it's a constitutional violation. But I think what is heartening is that there's a lot of activism on this around the country now, and states like Illinois just reinstituted Medicaid funding for abortion services. And it's really important because increasingly the women who are left uncovered, and therefore the women who are increasingly the population that has abortions are low income. And that is the hardest thing for them to be able to handle. So we see that at clinics across the country.
We've had legal abortion, but you can't access it if you're poor. So wrong. Well, Nancy, we're out of time, but we so admire the work of the Center for Reproductive Rights and everything you're doing to champion human rights and reproductive rights for everyone. And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for the honor.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.